Hello and welcome to Almost 30 Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. It's Linds and Krista. Thanks for joining us for another banger.
I'm so glad you're here. I'm wearing my sweatshirt is the same color as the wall, so if I'm a floating head, it's all good. This is my
We break all
tone
rules.
is like stone.
I kind of
My
like it.
color
It's like
palette.
nice and soothing. We usually wear, like, I'm wearing a skin color. Like,
Yeah.
I think I wore this in our studio, our old studio, and I blended in with the curtains. I'm like, anyone want to direct me? Like,
I need support. That was
we need help.
when I spoke at this event recently, and I got off stage and I was like, dude, I fucking crushed it. I was amazing. But I was like, I said that because I overcame a lot of self-sabotaging practices to get there. I practiced a lot, whatever. So I got off and I like walk out and the guys were like, yo, your outfit was amazing. And I was like, I can buy this. I can't buy the skills that I've been working on forever. But they were like, it was so bright against the thing. And I was like, yeah, actually I didn't realize that the outfit's just, it's all
Everything.
part of the package, to be honest. But
I know. We learned that. I feel like we learned that back in the Pop Sugar days where we would
Yep.
see people match.
Chrissy Teigen.
Yep, Chrissy Teigen would match the set, and we're like, God damn, that is everything.
It's next level. Yeah, it's what you do kind of when you're in our space. And I can feel people doing it with us. It's like you kind of watch. You're like, oh, what are they doing? How are they sitting? Like, what is their outfit? What is like going on? Because it's so much more than just like what someone's saying. It's like their whole presence, for better or worse, online. But anyways, I'm excited about this conversation because this episode on Girls Gotta Eat, the homies, Ashley and Raina, was incredible. It was so good. And then Vienna, Mindful MFT, is Connor's wife, who was on the show as well. And her book was really, really powerful. Our conversation was great. So I think this is going to be such a good one. And we always need a little bit more man energy in our lives.
Yeah, it was so refreshing, I have to say. I don't think I've sat down. I don't think I've sat down with a man in our
You're
like
telling me, honey.
interview context in a little while. Krista and I have been doing interviews on our own in our respective cities when we're not together. And it was just really, really nice to have that like solid, conscious presence from him. And we've had that with a few of our male guests, a handful, more than a few. And it's like, whew, there's something about it that like regulates your nervous system,
Yes.
and we were meeting for the first time, but it felt so, so comfortable. So we have on Connor Beaton on the podcast of ManTalks. He has a new book out, Men's Work. And I really love that we just allowed the conversation to flow in many different, avenues of exploration. And it also felt like it all connected in a really beautiful way. But I did want to bring this one topic that I found so interesting. And you ironically were like, oh my God, I've become obsessed with this concept through listening to someone else. And that is this idea that as women, we have like an initiation into womanhood. Called initiation, I don't know, but it's like our menstrual period. Or our menstrual cycle. This kind of marks the beginning of womanhood and all the things, which if I really think about it it's true and also hilarious a little bit. I don't know why. Like, I think it's very true on like a physical level. And I think societally, then we're kind of thrust into this, like you could get pregnant and all these things, but
That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
I actually don't feel the weight of it as like an initiation into womanhood. And I think it's because, and I don't want to go too far off track, but I think it's because there was so much like shame and also like just ways to cover up this transition. So it was like, well, wear the pad and here's how to use a tampon and, you can do this in private. And it was like, kind of like, this is going to suck. You're going to have this for the next 20 years. And there was no like joyful initiation in my experience. And I think a lot of people feel that too. And if you don't, and you had a great experience, amazing. But for men, that doesn't really exist. And Connor was kind of, half joking when he's like, yeah, like we start to get like random boners, like, it's just kind of, we have wet dreams. It's kind of weird, but like there's not like an event or an initiation to welcome us into manhood, like women have. And he said that what he's seen in his work specifically is that men will subconsciously find a way to seek out that initiation. And oftentimes it manifests in a rock bottom, where men will hit a rock bottom in whatever capacity, maybe in their health or in their career or in their relationships or all three or more. And they will use that as a way to overcome, to kind of like defeat the rock bottom and climb up from,
oh my God, yeah.
Where they were to the top, and kind of use that. And I was like, if I could, I had like 5 men pop up in my mind of like
Same.
those who have kind of subconsciously chosen a rock bottom of sorts, or still kind of on the way down, because they didn't have that opportunity to like be initiated or be accepted into or really feel the power of their manhood.
Yeah, I have so much to say about this, and I'm so grateful we're talking about it, because I heard it on one of the podcasts that I listen to. I listen to most no podcasts that are usually in our space I'm listening to, but he was talking about this concept, and he's like, women are initiated naturally by life, and then men in most societies and cultures have had to choose their initiation path, whether that was a vision quest, or whether that was war, or whether that was leaving the house to fight in battle, or whatever it was. And now as a society and culture, our men don't really have those ways of creating their purpose or their path or being initiated like you were talking about. And women it's interesting because women have multiple initiation points through life, like motherhood, because there's a lot of single mothers out there. So motherhood as this very physical, like visual initiation. Obviously, fatherhood is a huge initiation, of course, but there's a different experience for the mother and for, the woman in that way. And then, there's menopause. You lose that fertility cycle that you have, and you lose that experience. And women's bodies change so much. Like we have this like initiation of like our ever changing and ever evolving body in our lives. And I think because men don't and lack that initiatory opportunity right now that we've had throughout culture, and usually it's like the hero's journey vibe, where it's like you leave the house, you go into the woods on your own, and you meet your deepest, darkest shadows, and you actually are doing something that's really challenging that can help rearrange your psyche into like the hero. And so it's like men don't really have that as an opportunity now, so they have to create it, especially in the West, where they're like, I'm going to do the rock bottom, I'm going to, blow everything up, I'm going to do all these things. And I've noticed a lot of men in my life, it's like they will create that journey for themselves, and then they have to create the villain in that story. And that villain will be, my dad was never around, my ex-girlfriend was this, my teacher was this. You see a lot of athletes like Michael Jordan as an example, or Steve Jobs, or other ones that I can think about. It's always like in their journey, they have that one teacher or person part of their story that was like, you're never going to make it. You're never going to turn into anything. And then that becomes their fuel for a lot of their life until they become on the other side of their purpose and passion. But yeah, I think that's fascinating. And it's like, how can we support our men in finding ways to healthily initiate themselves into manhood?
Mm. Yeah, it's like almost that creating of adversity, not where there isn't.
No, makes sense.
Any, but you know what I mean? It's,
yeah.
And I find that sometimes Sean does that and he'll say it out loud. He's like, I work well with adversity. So he's like, I'm kind of creating it right now. And it's like, I think there's the aspect of the masculine that really likes to work with that. It's almost like primal.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I was reading something about sex and long-term relationships, and they were talking about how women release oxytocin through bonding, and they were talking about men releasing another type of hormone. There's another type of hormone, norepinephrine, maybe. I should look it up. And all of you neuroscientists DM me. But basically, there's another type of hormone that's released that men release through group activities or overcoming adversity and challenges or achieving goals. And that for men, that hormone is actually stronger for them than the bonding hormone. So the example that he gave was if you were having sex, if men are having sex and they're like, I'm going to get you off 2 times. Like we're going to have sex 3 times. We're going to do all these things. And women are like, oh my God, I just want it to feel good. I just want to connect with you. I just want to, that is women wanting the oxytocin to connect. And men are actually wanting to have that hormone that feels better for them, that feels more connected for them, that's based on achievement or based on like us working together towards a common goal. And men have usually had that through wars and obviously things that we've been talking about that have supported them in the release of that hormone in a healthy way that helps them create stable relationships. But right now, because they don't have that, it's like, how can we help men to support themselves in what is biologically natural for them in their life, in the release of that hormone, which gives them purpose. Whereas women, we prioritize the connection. But I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh yeah, I've thought about that with men and sex where we always have our perception of sex where like we want it to be slow or we want it to be all of these ways. And there's actually an expression that men have as well that's different than ours that makes them feel on purpose or fulfilled or whatever that's actually related to like achievement.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think it just points to the importance of, seeking to understand rather than being right, especially when it comes to understanding the opposite gender, and this brings me to one of the other really big pieces of this conversation, which was toxic masculinity and how it's doing more harm than help. And there's just so many signals being sent to men that like the way that they are is inherently wrong and inherently bad. Because of this conversation around toxic masculinity.
Say more, I guess, because like the conversation around toxic masculinity is doing more harm than good because we know that toxic masculinity is doing more harm, right?
Yes, correct. Thank you for that clarification. So
I guess like us talking poorly about how bad toxic masculinity is a problem too.
Yeah, and I guess the conversation around toxic masculinity doesn't seek to understand. It's very much a blanket statement that I think a lot of men have internalized and not necessarily, and a lot of people have internalized and not necessarily sought to discuss and find the nuance in it. And so he was talking about toxic masculinity and how it's approach or how it has affected how men approach women. And basically there is this aspect of this kind of zeitgeist conversation around toxic masculinity that has caused men to kind of despise those parts of themselves, even though the parts of themselves that could be toxic, could be expressed in a non-toxic way. So if, for example, if a man really values like being a leader, there could be a toxic expression of that or a more positive, conscious expression of that. But because it's, kind of looped within that toxic masculinity conversation, men are finding that they're just not allowing themselves to be expressed at all and feel kind of almost like nervous. They're really censoring themselves. And this is not a conversation around like, oh, woe is men. It's more a conversation around like, how can we bring more depth to this conversation rather than taking this very broad concept of toxic masculinity and applying it to all men, because I do think there's toxic femininity, like there's
100%. What do you mean? Of course. Yeah, I'm always just like, if we're going to be talking about the perpetrators, the men as the perpetrators, if people are going to go with that, it's like, then they need the most healing. They need the most expression. They need the most conversation. They need the most understanding. They need the most of everything. And
Yeah.
so I could see how that would totally be harmful. And I think I've seen that with a lot of very generous, kind men in my life where they've been like very censored. They feel very misunderstood. They feel very cornered. They feel very judged. They feel very paralyzed by the perception that whatever they're going to do or however they're going to express their masculinity is bad or toxic. And I think about that, in the sense of like it's suppressing both men and women because I think the feminine, we have rage, the rage is very feminine and we have anger as well. But it's like, I feel suppressed in rage and anger. Like, I feel like those emotions are not okay. So there's that
Mhm.
part of my experience where, and I can only imagine where men who naturally probably have more aggression, just based on biologically, based on testosterone, having that suppressed is probably feels really funky in the body and it is comes
Mhm.
out all sorts of sideways. And so, yeah, I think it's really beautiful to open up this conversation and talk about it because I think to have men be experienced in the way that women want, we need to understand and we need to listen. And I know so many, every woman that I talk to, not ev- I will say everyone because if I've I know women even though I haven't talked to them about it, but everyone that I've talked to is expressing the same type of energy from a man that they want, which is one that is incredibly in their masculine and grounded
Exactly.
and embodied and
Mhm.
present. And there's someone that I have a crush on online, and it's like literally the most random person on earth. And it's like someone that people would never know. They're like older, and it's like bizarre. It's a bizarre experience. But I was like sitting in my bed, and I'm like, why am I so obsessed with them? And I was like, because they are so present. Like this human is literally the way that he's listening to people is like the Olympics. It is like he's dissecting every word that they're saying and listening so intently. It's like that's all he's doing. And I'm just like, oh, that presence is so nice. You know what I mean? That like
Mhm.
full focus presence is so nice. But if we are seeking to have more present men, even for children or even for a partner, even for a father, even for a coworker or whatever, this isn't just like romantic relationships if you're a woman dating a man. It's like any type of the masculine within us. There also is the masculine within us that we are telling ourselves is toxic if we are talking about toxic masculinity. So, how can we bring it back to the experience of like liberating parts of everyone and ourselves?
Yeah. And the piece around that you brought up, that there are aspects of the masculine that the feminine really desire, if we're just talking about the energetics. And so
Yeah.
there that's why, and we talk about this kind of the confusion. There's confusion around, wait, so these parts are bad, but yet this is what I'm getting messages about that the feminine desire, because it's true. And he
Yes.
shares data on that, how there's kind of that weird gap between the messaging around toxic masculinity, but then what women are desiring and what men feel like they can't express any longer. So it's a
Yeah.
very nuanced conversation, but like such an interesting one that made me self-reflect, on just what I desire, and then also kind of the strength of the messages that come about in like these spaces that use, phrases like toxic masculinity or whatever, that are very real, but then how we kind of take that on as our own truth when there's no real understanding of it.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm someone that's been harmed by men in my life at various points in time, and I've had to really work on that, but I've never felt like it was, yeah, I never kind of go to like one thing as the thing, as the toxic masculinity. And I've been thinking about how there's a conversation in our space around being more in our feminine. Most of the women in our community that I work with want to be more in their feminine, which is really beautiful. But then it's also like, what is the part of us that's like feeling ashamed or feeling like we're wanting to move away from the masculine? And why are we seeing that as bad? And I don't think that what people are trying to do is move out of the masculine. I think it's moving out of the parts of them that aren't even in the masculine or feminine. It's like just the parts that are unaligned, or the parts that like aren't serving, or the parts that aren't healthy. And it's not like, yeah. So I was just thinking about that too, because I think there's a lot of people that are trying to like, also women that are also looking at their masculine as bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good point. We did not discuss that, but I wanted to discuss that actually.
Yin and yang, baby.
We'll get into
love
it.
all parts. We're here to love all parts. We're here to
This
love and
conversation
accept all
I'm really
parts.
excited to share. And yeah, we were talking about how women are actually reading his new book, Men's Work, as well, to understand their partners, their brothers, their fathers. It's pretty cool. Pretty
I
profound.
love women, dude. We like never stop. It's
I
just
know.
crazy.
We're like
guys are like, I'm trying to do work for men. And we're like, we want to know too. Like, we're just like, he's like, no, please, I'm trying to do a retreat just for men. And we're like, we will sell this retreat out. Just give us the information, please.
we're always so hungry. We're just
hungry. I love us.
Let us be a part of the process.
Little sleuths. We're just always trying to figure it out.
You can learn more about Connor's work at mantalks.com. He is a dad. He is a husband. He's an author. He is a coach. I think you're really going to love, love, love this conversation. Be sure to follow him on Instagram at ManTalks. And the new book, again, is Men's Work.
You can find more information about Almost 30 at almost30.com, where we have our partnership links. We have our membership, which you can join. We have our courses and programs. We have some really, really, really great content there. If you want to start a podcast, we can support you in that. We have courses and programs for podcasters. We're on TikTok. It's popping off, Almost 30 Podcast, Almost 30 Podcast on Instagram. And then we have our daily dose, which is morning microdose. So it's almost like the TikTok of podcasts. You just get a little hit of inspiration, of motivation every single day without ads on our second podcast, Morning Microdose.
Enjoy this conversation with Connor. We will see you on the other side.
Love you guys. I just left my hairdressers and I got a toner just to let my color last a little bit longer. And I was looking in the mirror and I said, my hair is longer than ever. And I felt like for so long it was stuck at a certain length. It was just like stuck mid-length, kind of boring. And she even said, she's like, yeah, what are you doing? Your hair's gotten so long since I've seen you a month ago. And I'm like, I've been regular with Neutriful, honey, and it's finally growing. And I'm so, so, so happy. I feel so much better. It feels so good and so thick. And I know that for so many women, you can be impacted by weakened or thinning hair. If you're among them, you know you're not alone, and know that there's a solution that can really support you in having long, thick, gorgeous hair, the hair that you really dream of. I know that if we don't feel good about the way that we look, we can feel less confident, we can feel less ourselves. So it's not just something that's fully vanity. This is something that makes us feel more like the person that we want to be. Neutriful is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement. It's clinically shown to improve hair growth, thickness, and visible scalp coverage. And it really targets your hair growth from within. That's why I love it. It supports the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism, all through whole body health. Neutriful has 3 unique formulas that support women through all phases of life. So if you just had a baby and you're postpartum or menopause, or you just want longer, thicker hair, it's got you. There's 3,000 top doctors and stylists who recommend Neutriful as an effective and high-quality solution for healthier hair. You can grow longer, thicker, healthier hair and support Almost 30 by going to Neutriful.com and entering promo code ALMOST to save $10 off your first month subscription. You can grow longer, thicker hair and support Almost 30 by going to Neutriful.com and entering promo code ALMOST to save $10 off your first month subscription. This offer is only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. So you can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Neutriful.com and enter promo code ALMOST to save $10 off your first month subscription and get free shipping. That's free shipping and $10 off your first month subscription at Neutriful.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, and promo code ALMOST. Again, get longer, thicker hair, get $10 off your first month's order, and free shipping at Nutrifol.com with promo code ALMOST. This episode is brought to you by IQ Bar. You can get 20% off every IQ Bar product plus free shipping when you text ALMOST to 64,000. That's almost to 64,000. I love IQ Bar. I actually just finished the sampler pack. I had the sample pack sent to the house. I bought 2 sample packs just because I wanted to remind myself of every single amazing flavor of IQ Bar. I've been eating IQ Bar for breakfast and then also having one in the afternoon. And it's my favorite because it's one of the bars that doesn't make me crave more sugar. It doesn't make me crash energetically. It helps me have sustained energy through the day. I feel more alert. I feel more energized. I feel full. Sometimes when I'd have bars before, I would feel even more hungry. I'd want to eat 20 bars at one time, and I just would never feel satisfied. And IQ Bar is truly one of the best because it's keto, vegan, non-GMO, gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free, and has almost no sugar. So it's plant protein, it has prebiotic fiber with healthy fats and none of the bad stuff. On the podcast, we've been talking a lot about blood glucose levels and making sure that we're being mindful of the way that we're supporting our body with our healthy blood glucose. And a lot of times these protein bars that you can buy from the store have so much sugar. It's almost like a candy bar when you buy it. And I love IQ Bar because it has a lot of fiber, it has a lot of protein, and almost no sugar. So it really gives you nutritious snacking. It's great for pre and post exercise. It's a great grab and go breakfast and helps that right before dinner hunger moment. It's just such a great option and opportunity for people to feel really good, to support their body, to get more protein in, to support their blood glucose levels, and eat something that's incredibly delicious. I love IQ Bar. It's been such a great add to my diet, and my favorites are the chocolate sea salt. I also love the peanut butter chip, obviously, and randomly, I love the banana nut. Lindsey and I have to split the banana nut whenever we're around each other because we both want the banana nut, but each flavor is truly incredible and tastes amazing. Again, chocolate sea salt's bomb, peanut butter chips bomb, banana nuts my favorite, but I really like the 7-bar sampler. You can get it, it's like $14.99, and you can really taste every single flavor. So try IQ Bar. It's incredible. You can get 20% off every IQ Bar product plus free shipping when you text ALMOST to 64,000. That's almost to 64,000.
I would love to start there kind of with having a son.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how it's been impactful as someone who, you know, has obviously done so much work. But I can imagine when you have a child, it's like you almost can't prepare for it.
No. You know, it's interesting because I think kids are just like mirrors for the little versions of us that maybe didn't get to have a voice or understand what was happening when we were growing up. And it's been interesting because a lot of my own journey and my own story has started to really bubble up to the surface in a different way. You know, like my parents get divorced when I was 3, and there was some stuff happening in my parents' marriage that I think was really impacting my family system and impacting me as a kid. And you know, knowing what I know now about attachment and how the first 3 years are the most really like important and formative for us, you know, in terms of our attachment. Having my son in my life has really brought a lot of that to the front and center. And I think it's brought up a lot of the grief that I had stored in me, you know, about being a boy who didn't have his dad around. Mm-hmm. And it was brutal. You know, it was like really brutal. And I think, like, I remember, like, my parents got divorced when I was 3. They both remarried when I was 5 and 6. They both had a daughter with their respective other partners when I was 7 and 8. And then they both had a son when I was 10 and 11. And so I actually grew up in these identical family systems on the outside, right? Siblings were the same age, parents were the same age. But everyone was polar opposite. Like my mom and my stepmom are just totally different humans. My dad and my stepdad, totally different humans. And so I grew up viewing a lot of juxtaposition of character and personality. And it really got me curious as to like, why are people the way that they are? And anyway, just to come back to the sort of crux of the question, I remember being a kid, and when my mom and my stepdad got married, you know, like 6, 7 years old, and there were nights where I was just like inconsolable, you know, because I missed my dad so much, and I didn't understand why he wasn't around, and I didn't understand why I couldn't talk to him, and you know, it was really a heartbreaking thing as a kid who really just wanted, like, I loved my dad, I idolized him. And so I think having my own son has brought some of those emotions back to the surface of like, man, I've done a lot of work on myself because I was a shit show for a long time. And it's almost like this culmination of like, yeah, I did a lot of this work and I thought it was for me initially and maybe for whoever I was going to date. But there's this realization that a lot of it, you know, while it shows up in how I do my business and my mission, my purpose in the world, a lot of it really was, unbeknownst to me, was for him. You know, it was for my boy. And I get to really be present for him and love him. And in a way that, you know, I think in a way that I really wanted. And I think that's unbelievably meaningful. You know, that for us as parents, we're not going to get everything right. I know I'm going to screw up. You know, I had a mentor of mine who said 2 things that always stuck with me. He said, you know, I would die for my kids, but I won't live my life for them, which I really love and appreciate.
Love that.
And 2, he said, he's Irish, and he said, you're going to fuck up your kids no matter what you do. And that always kind of stuck with me because I was like, yeah, I've done all this work, and you know I'm not going to get it right. I don't need to be perfect dad. I don't need to be super dad. You know, I just want to be present in his life. And I think that a lot of the work that I've done has made it so that, you know, he's 25 months now, and I've been there for him. You know, I set up my business in a way where when he was born, I spent the first 2.5 months at home with him and my wife. And it's been incredibly rewarding and healing, and just a lot of things, you know, just a lot of things that I didn't expect at all. And I thought I was prepared, you know, and then he came on the scene, and, you know, there's just things that you can't prepare for. Like people can tell you what it's going to be like in terms of the sleep deprivation, but until you're in that moment where like you're 6 months deep and you haven't slept right at all in 6 months, and there's this part of you that's just like raging out and like, okay, how much longer do I have to deal with this bullshit? And you know, and so it's you know, it's interesting to see what parenting brings up, but I feel very grateful to have so many tools and to feel so well equipped to be there for him and to be a space of regulation for him.
Yeah. I mean, a few things, and thank you for sharing that. It's just like, you know, whatever you believe, but like, how good is God in that way? You know, God, creator, divine, whatever is happening, like that you had that experience as a child, and now you're being given this opportunity not to be perfect, not to make it right, not to do any of that, but rather to have an experience and to give your son an experience that, yeah, you desired. And I'm kind of in awe of moments like that where it's like, wow, like it truly is such a beautiful gift always. And then also just this like threshold piece too. 'Cause I know you talk about this in your work with men where there is kind of that healthy pushing of our like limits and thresholds, and being able to self-regulate in those moments and being able to understand our limits and push them and how that is healthy. And yeah, I mean, I can only imagine as like a parent, like you said, the sleep deprivation, it's like,
it's real.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in those moments where you want to snap on your partner or blame something on them or someone else, it's like, yeah, in those moments, what have you found to be the most useful tools that you have?
So there's a number of them. I think I just want to talk about the threshold first, because I think this is super important. I see a lot of people navigating the threshold. I'm a huge proponent of Carl Jung and the Jungian frameworks, not necessarily because I, think that everything that he talked about was true or accurate, but because a lot of his work was based in mythology and archetypes and symbolism. And I think that myth holds truths that we sometimes can't just put into sentences, into like very simple phrases. And one of the archetypes that I've come to know and realize and get familiar with in my own life, and that I see a lot of people struggling with, is something called the guardian of the threshold. And there's a specific archetype that whenever we want to create change, whenever we're trying to alter something in our life, a behavior, a belief, something within our relationship, that there comes a time and moment where the guardian of the threshold shows up and tests us. And that might be, a test of old behavior patterns, people, that come in to tempt us, to see whether or not, are you going to move back to the old pattern, or are you actually going to punch through, this new way of being? And I always think of it as, I think it was Indiana Jones. I don't know. It wasn't the Temple of Doom. I think it was the
Don't
Lost
get this wrong.
Ark. I know. I'm gonna like the fan boys and girls out there are gonna like.
Because I've seen everyone 20 times.
I know, right? But there's this moment where Indiana has to cross an invisible bridge, right? And he's met with this impossible decision of, you have to have the faith that the bridge is there, and you have to step on it before it actually manifests. And that's the guardian of the threshold, that we oftentimes in life, when we're needing to shift and change, it's actually demanding that we take a step of faith, maybe not a leap, but take a step. And for me, a lot of the work that I've done over the years has required that I take that first step, and then the bridge will appear, or I'll stumble on my face, and get it wrong. I've taken a step in the wrong direction, then I learn and I can go back. But that guardian of the threshold, I think, is something that, especially in parenting, but I think in being an entrepreneur, especially in relationships. I mean, all of our shit comes out in relationships, just all of it.
Yes.
Jung said that
purposely.
Yeah, right. Jung said that marriage is the fastest horse in the race of individuation, right? Or in this process towards wholeness, that relationship is where all of our stuff comes up. So come back to your initial question. Very simple things sometimes, like reconnecting to the breath. Our breath is our dial for our autonomic nervous system. So most of us in our daily lives are living in a very stressed out state. So we're in a more sympathetic dominant state, right? So you've got two parts to your autonomic nervous system. You've got your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. And your sympathetic is like the gas pedal, right? It's the stress response, it's the go, there's adrenaline, there's cortisol. That's what we need in the meetings and, dealing with certain situations, getting the emails done, et cetera. And then the parasympathetic is that part that's the calm, the rest, the digest, the easygoing, the more relaxed. And your breath is the part that actually can help you turn the dial. So the more stressed you are, the more that your breath per minute goes up, the more that your heart rate goes up, and the more that you can feel that sort of like stressed, anxious response. Now, when you're a parent, that's amplified. And if you're in a relationship where you feel anxious or, you're feeling like you're not getting what you want or need, that part of your body, that part of your nervous system is getting turned on. And so what we want to do is we want to start to turn down that dial. And so I created a very simple practice with my son as an example to co-regulate with him, where when he starts to while out and he's, unmanageable, he's throwing a tantrum, he's doing whatever, and I can feel myself getting pulled into the fray, getting pulled into the storm, I'll pick him up and I'll look at him and I'll say, inhale, exhale. And he might throw a little bit of a tantrum for a little bit longer, but I'll just remain in that cycle. And what happens is that my body starts to regulate, my nervous system starts to regulate, and then he feels that, and he's gotten into the habit now of like, and so he'll do it with me. And so I think that sometimes we overcomplicate what we actually need when it comes to these grounding modalities, regulating our nervous system. And there's a tremendous amount of data that has gone into helping people with things like PTSD and trauma. And what they've found is a very simple thing, and maybe I'll pause on this, is that if you inhale through your nose for the count of 4 and hold for 2, and then exhale through your mouth for a count of 6 or 7, that natural breath cycle will do a couple things. One, it's going to regulate how many breaths you're taking per minute, which will actually begin to force your heart rate to slow down. And that forcing the heart rate to slow down will send a signal to your brain, because there's 80% more information traveling from your body to your brain than there is your brain to your body. So that natural slowing down of the breath, slowing down of the heart, will send a signal to your brain saying, we're okay.
We're okay, yeah.
Right? We're all right. So you can do that breath cycle, whether you're in conflict with your partner or your kids are freaking out. And that very simple tool is something that will send the signal to your body and your brain that it's time to calm and it's okay to calm. And so those are just some simple things that I do on a regular basis. I know those are like very tactical, but they're
powerful.
They're real and they work, and they work for people who have PTSD and trauma, and they work for people who have anxiety, and they work for people just across the spectrum.
Yeah, it makes me think about, that just scene of you and your son. We can kind of use that model or template in really any relationship. If your partner comes home from work and is fired up and just kind of wiling out, being that oak tree, being kind of that stability. And I often, I even had a conversation with my husband last night, and I felt like the most calm I was all day. And even though he was kind of having he's like, I want to vent about this, which I was ready and wanting him to do. But I was like, wow, this is so powerful, because I noticed just how he didn't escalate in a way that maybe if I was feeding it, it would. And so it's just something to think about, in relationship. And I just love that you brought up the breath, because it's something, one, that's free. Two, we all do it all day, but we don't necessarily do it in a way that's conscious and intentional and slow and deep and in our bellies.
Yeah.
It's all up here. It's like,
and that's a panic response,
yes.
Right? I think as I've noticed, as the therapeutic industry has become so large and so prominent within our culture, I've noticed that the simple tools are sometimes lost, and we overcomplicate things. And so most of us, because of the nature of our realities right now, inflation and the economy and threats of war and climate change and all these things on top of relational stress, parenting stress, financial stress, we're just taxed. Most people's nervous systems are taxed. And so if you can be someone on a day-to-day basis who can share a grounded nervous system with the people around you, you are providing an incalculable service to humanity in a way. And that might sound big and woo and existential, but try it out, right? Be grounded in yourself around people and notice how they shift, right? You can almost notice people's demeanor change, their breath slow down, they kind of relax, they ease into it. And this is the gift that we need to be able to give one another in trying times. But if we're not practicing it on a regular basis, and if we're not doing it for ourselves, and we're constantly waiting for other people to come and help us feel centered and feel grounded and feel okay, then we're in a lot of trouble as a species. And that's kind of what's happening in a place where, most people go online every single day and they've outsourced their nervous system to social media and the internet, and they're dysregulated because they're constantly interacting with other people's dysregulated nervous systems and minds.
Yeah, right? That's something that we definitely don't think about. And you saying that right in that moment, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
We are interacting with people's dysregulated nervous systems when we are on scrolling Instagram, scrolling TikTok, bing, bing, bing. It's like, wow.
Yeah. So I think we just need to return to some of these simple things. And in relationships, I mean, my wife and I do this too, right? I'll always just try and pause and take a breath and like feel my feet on the floor, because she's spicy, you know, she's got lots of heat.
Yeah. It's a nice balance. Do you appreciate that balance?
100%.
Yeah.
Nice. I like potency in almost all aspects of life. You know, I think I like to see where my edge is as a man. I like to see where my edge is in many different ways. And I think there's something to being with a woman who has her own connection to her own fire, you know, and that it's not too much for me. And I think for her, that's been a beautiful gift as well, because when we first started dating, she tells this story, so what I'm about to tell is not, it's, you know, she tells it all the time, where we've been dating for a few months and we were on vacation somewhere, and I was driving and she was in the passenger seat, and we were in conversation. I have no idea what the heck she said, but she said something that crossed the line and that was really disrespectful to me. And I just took a breath and turned to her and I said, "Don't speak to me like that. I don't like that." And she was silent and quiet, and it wasn't combative and it wasn't a threat. It was just like, that's not okay with me.
Yeah.
And the next day, she didn't say anything for a while, and we went on with her day, and we kept traveling. The next day she was like, that was the most honest, respectful, check that I've ever got. And I just didn't know what to do with it.
Totally.
But she's like, I felt so safe. And I immediately felt like I can be okay in this relationship. I can be safe with you. And we don't often think about safety being correlated or connected to boundaries, to I'm going to set a boundary with you, right? I'm going to say that that's not okay. So yeah, I know we got a little off topic there, but
no. I mean, right on topic always. There's something there about women, and I don't want to put words in your wife's mouth, but I've felt this way. This feeling of feeling too much. And I think early on in my dating life, it was like, I'm too much for people. Like these guys don't really understand me. I definitely wasn't being as vulnerable as I could because I didn't feel safe. But yeah, that too muchness. And then when you're held in your, whether it's too muchness or maybe a side of her in this scenario that was a little shadowy, or just a little side of her that maybe isn't
a little testy.
Yeah, a little testy. And you hold it, and you also are clear in the way that it made you feel. Yeah, it's so interesting to think of that feeling of safety, because, and I'm curious, I'm kind of reflecting on it in real time. Honesty is safety to me. And also just having such a solid mirror. And I think innately as human beings, we know that partners are meant to serve this incredible purpose that they're meant to serve. And so when we get those moments like that, especially early in dating, this happened with me and my husband, where I was his directness and his clarity, I was oh my gosh, this is a lot. But there was a part of me that I felt it in my heart where I was wow, I respect him, I like him, but I'm not ready for this. And then eventually we got together, but I think there's a part of us that knows that this is for our greatest and highest good. This is kind of what our soul is meant to do in relationship, is not to be comfortable and enabled.
Yeah.
And all of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy to love the parts of the person that you love.
Yeah.
Right. It's if you're funny and I like your humor, it's easy to love that part. Yeah. The real test of any relationship is, can I learn to love the parts of you that I don't like? Right? And can you learn to love the parts of me that you don't like? Because the truth is that I probably don't like those parts either in myself. Yeah. Right? The parts that you dislike about me, I probably don't like them either. The reactivity, the anger, the volatility, the shutting down, or the anxiousness, or the over-texting, or however that part manifests in the relationship. And so, we oftentimes discard those parts of us into the shadow, right? And we don't want people to see them. We don't want people to know about them. And those are the parts of us that oftentimes get in the way of us actually just feeling loved. It's like, oh, I can't stand this part of me. And so we try and hide it in our relationship. We don't want other people to know about it. We don't want to talk about it. But then to have somebody embrace that shadowy part and say, I don't like that, but I still love you. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh.
I mean, 100 years of healing in
right.
those moments.
It's because it's the thing that we crave as kids.
Yes.
That so many of us miss. And that so often goes astray and goes awry, within the family system, because of course it does. We're all going to have our wounding. Nobody's going to grow up in a perfect family system, and nor should they. Pain is, the first line of my book is a man's work begins in pain. Like pain has a valuable place within our life, and the sad part is that we try and extricate that from our relationships, from our existence. And we villainize these things that have happened to us, or we think that we should live a life free of any hardship. It's like, no, man, like that gives our life zest. Mm-hmm. Like there's awe and wonder sometimes that's baked into the hardship that we've experienced. And we've all had that, the stuff that I've gone through growing up as a kid, as a young man, my addictions, battle with pornography and weed and alcohol and cheating and all the stupid crap that I did. I can look back on that and say, I could carry shame around it and judge it and say, like, what a piece of garbage and blah, blah, blah. But that disconnection from that non-acceptance, that not working to bring that into who I am, will actually serve to create more of it. That's the strange part about our shadow. That's the strange part about the aspects of ourselves that we don't like. It's like anybody struggling with anxiety. The worst thing that we can do is like, oh, I hate this anxiety. It's like, well, that's going to create more of it. Yeah. We have to welcome in the dragon at the door, and we need to be able to have people in our corner that can help us do that. Because doing it alone is very hard. So I'll pause there.
In your work with thousands of men all over the world, what have you observed and experienced related to men and their metabolism of pain, or how they meet pain?
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes it's culturally dependent, religious dependent.
Sure.
But I think for the most part within male culture, within masculine culture, we've been taught to like suck it up, stuff it down, don't deal with it. Right. And there's a couple, like in the book, I talk about the one rule of men. If anybody's ever seen Fight Club, Fight Club is it's essentially a film about masculinity, right? Is really what it is. And a man going through a psychotic break, essentially, but but it's really a film about masculinity. And the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about it. You don't talk about Fight Club. And that's really the first rule of being a man, is you don't talk about what it's like to be a man who's struggling, who's suffering, who's in pain, who's been abused, who is hurting, who's lost, who's alone, who's isolated. And you don't talk about what it's like to be a man who has hurt other people. And so that's part of the first rules that we have to break in order to really start to build some kind of relationship with our own pain, because that pain is dictating our life in some capacity. There's a American therapist named Francis Weller who says your pain has its own intelligence. And so, I think that that's fundamentally true. And I think that when we as men don't come into contact with our own pain and start to understand it and start to understand that it has a place in our life, then it will drive our lives. It'll drive our decisions. It'll drive our choices, and we'll feel powerless and helpless to it through addictions, through bad behaviors, through, eating junk food at midnight when you have an important meeting the next day, or, smoking weed until 3:00 in the morning when you have a presentation the next morning, or whatever it is. So I think that's part of it. And then the other thing that I've come to see is men have, for generations, and some of this is rooted in, from a historical standpoint, is rooted in war, and specifically rooted in World War I and World War II. But men have grown up in a culture that has said there's strength in suppression. So the more that you as a man can suppress what you're feeling, not show it, not talk about it, pretend like it doesn't exist, the more that you can do that with your grief, with your sadness, with your anger, with your disappointment and your shame and your embarrassment, the stronger that you'll be. And the challenge is that for 99% of men, that will break them. It will just break them, because they'll come to a point where they can't hold in the pain that they've been carrying from childhood abuse, or, parents' divorce, or getting bullied in school, or, not having any friends, or, not being able to date women, which is a big thing today, right? It's like 66% of men between 18 and 29 are single. And 50% of those 66% of men aren't looking for a relationship, right? 1 of 3 men between 18 and 29 haven't been sexually active, right? And so those stats for women are radically different. And so for a lot of guys, there's this big isolation that's starting to permeate through male culture. They're isolated from work, they're isolated from friends, they're isolated from women, and they're isolated from family. And so when we've grown up in this environment that says just suppress it, the consequences are that oftentimes, in order to suppress what we're feeling, we have to disconnect from the things that we love, right? I can't stay in relationship with you and in contact with you when the burden that I'm carrying internally that I don't want you to know about is painful, right? And heavy. And so for a lot of guys, they will push people away, right? And I get messages like this all the time from men, like, do I have to break up with my partner in order to do the work? Do I need to be alone in order to do the work? It's like, no, man, you actually need to be around people to do the work. And maybe you need to be around other men, right? Maybe you shouldn't be bringing all of it into your relationship. But I think that's some of the stuff that I see with guys in terms of how we've been taught to relate to our pain, that there's merit in sort of stuffing it down. There's merit in ignoring it. And the more that you can ignore that pain or not let that pain, quote unquote, get to you, the more masculine you are and the more manly that you are. But it's a misrepresentation of the roots of that, which is stoicism, right? Which is actually about emotional understanding, truly about emotional intelligence, and in some ways about emotional domestication. So we actually have to get closer to our emotions and understand them and to begin to work with them, to tame them in some way, to have a proper relationship to them. And when I say tame and when I say domesticate, I don't mean them in a negative connotation. I mean that we've actually done the work to build a relationship with those parts of us so that they're not constantly acting out against us, right? They're not getting in the way of our goals, of our love, of our sexual intimacy, because that's oftentimes what is getting in the way for a lot of men from the goals and the aims and the intimacy that they're craving. It's, I can't let people know about this part of me. Right. And so I'll cut myself off from them.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, all of these desires that men have to be intimate, to be successful. And I see a lot of men and women going for more of that quick fix of like, okay, so how do I get the promotion? And how do I, be a great lover? And there is this they're not aware of, or there's a total avoidance of the root of everything. And I think especially for men, that's why I'm so glad you're here. And Krista and I love your work because, we're in the space. We're with a lot of women who have a lot of resources for everything, thankfully. And I feel like it's not as normalized that men tap into these resources and communities around their self-development and mental health and emotional health and physical health. And, I'm thankful we're talking about this because the loneliness piece is something that I've experienced in my own life, watching my brother, my father. And I guess for you, who is someone who is leading and teaching on this and meeting so many men, I'm wondering, like, how do men come to this realization? Or do you have to like knock on everyone's door? Because
I do door-to-door sales. No, I'm
I
just joking.
mean,
Although I
that
did
would
do
be
that.
a great business.
I did do that at one point. I did when I was like 17 or 18. I did door-to-door vacuum sales, which was
Wow.
ridiculous. I was like selling a $2,300 vacuum.
I
just
love that.
Fun fact about my ridiculous
I mean, my
past.
mom has had her vacuum for 30 years, so I'm sure that
Maybe she bought it from a door-to-door vacuum salesman like me, and made me very happy back in the day. But no, I think, look, I'm going to say a couple of things about the therapeutic industry. I'm going to say about why more men don't come into this work. I think I just prefaced part of that, which is, kind of rubs against this Marlboro man, lone wolf mentality, that a lot of guys are still trying to live into, that there's a proving that we as men think needs to happen. And part of that is because our culture has strip mined initiation out of it. So there's no initiatory processes for a man to go through to understand that it's okay for him to go and get support and help from other people.
Yeah.
And the whole, Richard Rohr said that unless a man goes through a journey of powerlessness, he'll always abuse power, right? Unless a man goes through a journey of powerlessness, he'll always abuse power. And we as men, I think psychologically, we as men know that somewhere in our being. And so when we lack an initiatory process where we would normally experience powerlessness that we can't overcome, that we can't conquer, that we can't dominate, that we can't win against, we walk out into the world and believe that everything is conquerable. We can dominate everything. And in some ways, when we operate in that way, life needs to come along and humble us. So that's part of it. The other part of it is that we as men are looking for the threshold. This is back to the threshold conversation. We are looking for a threshold to help demarcate a transition into manhood, because we don't have one, right? It's, for a lot of women, they get their menstruation cycle, and that's a very clear indication. I've moved into a different phase of my life physically. Yeah. For men, that doesn't really happen. We hit puberty, maybe our voice changes a little bit. That's not, that big of a deal. And then suddenly, this is maybe going to be rude or crude, but we start to get boners on the bus and in classroom and wet dreams and those types of things. That's not really an initiation into manhood. That's just like, well, now I have this different sexual function that's online.
Right.
So when we miss that, what ends up happening is that we start to crave it. So a lot of men like myself, what I did was I used bottoming out as an initiatory process. So a lot of men will unconsciously bottom out in life. They'll destroy their career, they'll destroy their relationship, their family, they'll destroy something in their life as an unconscious means to see, can I climb my way back out of this shithole? Can I actually get back out of this place where I feel powerless, right? Because what do we feel at rock bottom? We feel powerless, we feel helpless. It's something that we can't conquer, it's something that we can't dominate. So hitting rock bottom actually has all of the markers of an initiation. It's an inverse one. It's sort of a strange one, right? But when we hit rock bottom, the other thing that we have to do is we usually have to go to our community and we have to start to open up. And so a lot of men come into this work because they bottomed out, or because they're about to, or because there's a threat that they might. And they've identified that and they're like, oh shit, things aren't good, right? I'm about to implode my career. My marriage is on the brink. This relationship that I really care about, this woman that I really care about is like threatening to leave me. What do I do? How do I solve this? How do I fix it? Something's really wrong and I can't ignore it anymore. So that's a big part of why men come into the work. And then the last piece is, this one's always an interesting one. The therapeutic space is predominantly feminine. It's driven by women. It's run by women. 29% of psychologists are men. It's less for therapists. When you look at enrollment in institutions around America, specifically for psychology, it's like 80% women right now. So when a man wants to go into therapy, is being told, go into therapy, what he does is he goes online and he sees a tremendous amount of overwhelming content geared towards women that aren't really speaking to him. They're not talking his language. They're not talking about really even his problem. And the solutions that are being offered are often very feminine in nature. And so he goes out and says, well, like, I don't know if any of this stuff is really for me, which is why our slogan is it's training, it's not therapy. Because for guys, we've grown up in a culture where we're training based. We want to do something. We want to take action. We want to test ourselves. We want to meet our limits and our edge. And there's a lot of research that's showing, there's a guy, I believe Dr. John Barry out of the UK, and he runs an institution specifically for men. And he's done some research around what's the most rewarding thing for men. And what he found was that self-development, being able to work on ourselves as men, is one of the most rewarding things that we can do, because it tests us and it pushes us and all of these things that we love, right? But I think that the therapeutic industry isn't really set up to, I think, in the best way, support men. I mean, even the American Psychological Association, the APA, released guidelines for therapists and psychologists and counselors on how to work with men. And in it, they did a couple things, one of which was said that traditional masculinity is dangerous and harmful.
Okay.
That's verbatim. That's
Wow.
line for line in there. And secondly, and this one's a little more controversial, so
And this is new.
this was in 2019, 2020.
Yeah, makes sense.
Right before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And the second part was that they said that gender is only a social construct. So for a lot of guys who have gone through puberty and they've felt what testosterone is like, they hear that and they're like, really, there's no biological implications? Like, my biology as a man doesn't have anything to do with my masculinity, doesn't have anything.
Wow.
So a lot of guys feel like it's like, well, then you don't understand what my experience is like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't have a place, I don't belong within this space. If you think that masculinity is harmful and toxic, why would I go talk to a therapist or a psychologist who's going to try and get me to behave or become a version of myself that I don't necessarily agree with or want to be? Because for a lot of men, we still pride ourselves on being self-leadership oriented, on being able to protect, being able to provide. And that shows up also in what women are looking for.
Yes.
Right? In a lot of ways. And we could go into the data and the research around that. But so I think those are some of the challenges. That's how men usually come into the space. That's why so many men are resistant towards going to therapy and going to psychology, like going to see a psychologist, going to couples therapy, because a lot of the times they feel like they're not welcome, and they feel like they're going to be talking about their partner's problems, and that they are going to be the cause of the problem, and their issues are going to be extracted from the equation.
Yeah.
So, that's a hard place to want to walk into.
Absolutely.
But I think that more and more the cultural conversation is starting to make more space to understand men. And I think we need to do a better job, because otherwise we lose men to messaging that is antiquated, that is and can be very harmful, and that actually reinforces their isolation and the pain that they're suffering. And so I think we need to do a much better job culturally to have these conversations. And I would just finally say, before I pause, that to talk about the issues that young boys and men are going through does not mean that I or anybody else is anti-women, right? I can say, here are the challenges that young boys are facing, and still advocate for women in business, in relationships, in culture. Like, those two things need to start to coexist.
Absolutely.
It can't be one or the other.
Yeah.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp has been a sponsor of Almost 30 for a very long time, and I'm so very grateful because I know it's really easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and really never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when you spend all your day giving, like I sometimes feel and very much feel right now, it can leave us feeling stretched, thin, and burnt out. I feel like that is the common theme that I hear within my DMs and when I talk to my community, that so many of you feel like you're doing 100 different things and you're incredibly burnt out. I know for me that I'm feeling like that a lot right now. We're writing our book and I've had some health issues in my family. And I feel like I'm just giving and giving and giving and pouring into everyone. And I don't feel like I'm getting that back in return. And I know that's something that I need to work on in therapy because that has a lot to do with codependency and just sort of the patterns that I've been in where I overgive and I have a hard time receiving. And I'm really grateful because therapy has given me the tools to find more balance in my life. I'm so much better than I was in the past. I'm so much better with my no. I'm so much clearer and I'm so much better with my boundaries. But there's always more work to do. If you want to keep supporting other people in the way that you do, because I know so many people in the Almost 30 community are so supportive and loving, you are all the best, you can leave yourself behind. And so I want you to think about therapy to support yourself, to give yourself an hour a week, to pour into yourself, to focus on you, to see what you need to do for your life and how you can make yourself better and how you can feel better in a way that's going to be sustainable. I've benefited so much from therapy. It's been the number one thing that's changed my life over the years. It's been so helpful and incredible for me. It's helped me really learn to trust in a huge way. I never thought I could trust someone like I trust my therapist. And it's really just helped me develop better boundaries and coping skills. BetterHelp makes therapy so much more accessible. You can update your appointment in the app. You can message with your therapist in the app, which is what I do a lot of the times. You can reschedule in the app, and you can switch therapists in a way that feels really easy. Sometimes if you're going outside of the BetterHelp network, it can be hard to switch therapists because you need to do a lot of research, but BetterHelp makes it really, really easy. I would love to support you in getting therapy with BetterHelp. It's entirely online, and you fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. And again, you can switch therapists at any time. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Use betterhelp.com/almost30 and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/almost30 and get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/almost30 and get 10% off your first month. Symbiotica believes that food is the best medicine, and modern diets leave us lacking vital nutrients, and that's where Symbiotica comes in. We've had a lot of guests on the show, like Zach Bush, who have talked about the quality of our soil, and unfortunately, because of the quality of our soil is lacking, the food that grows from it is also lacking nutrients that we need. So many people, although they eat well, are not getting every vital nutrient that they need. So it's really powerful to fill nutritional gaps and provide our bodies with everything that we need for vital health through companies like Symbiotica. I love that Symbiotica is so transparent. It's one of the things I love about them the most, especially in the supplement industry. There's other products that are full of fillers and toxins and synthetic ingredients, and they really, really have done so much research to create the best supplements on earth. They combine scientific innovation with traditional Eastern medicine to design formulas that synergize with the body. Their supplements are sourced from the highest quality plant-based ingredients and use the most advanced absorption technology. Their mission is really to change the world by empowering people to reclaim their health through education, transparency, nutrition. We've had the founder, Sherveen, on the podcast many times. Those are incredible episodes that have so many people talking about them, and they have such great products that I use every single day. I love their liposomal delivery products, like their vitamin D, which I take quite often because I was deficient in vitamin D, like many people are. I felt so much more energy. I've noticed such a difference in my skin, and I've just felt better all around. So their liposomal vitamin D plus K2 and KQ10. I also take their liposomal B12. Because I'm plant-based, I don't get a lot of B12, and it's helped me have so much more energy. It's helped me feel so much better in my body. And my other two favorites from them are their liposomal glutathione and then their liposomal magnesium. Their liposomal magnesium tastes like vanilla cream. It's like the most delicious thing ever. I've put it on my oatmeal. I just have it out of the pack. And then their glutathione is the master antioxidant. So this is so important for so many aspects of health. And these products just taste amazing. They work really well. and they've helped me feel so much better in my body. I love that at Symbiotica, you can get 15% off your purchase. And in addition to custom bundle discounts, you can get 45% off. So if you go to their website, symbiotica.com, and you do a custom bundle, you can actually add the almost 30 code to that custom bundle to increase your discount to like 45%, which is crazy. So you can get incredible supplements like vitamin C, like Shilajit, like their magnesium, vitamin D, super greens, longevity mushrooms, so many different things at symbiotica.com. That's CYMBIOTIKA.com. CYMBIOTIKA.com. And then use code ALMOST30 to get 15% off your first purchase. That's ALMOST30 to get 15% off your first purchase and up to 45% off when you do a bundle.
It's really interesting that we're kind of living through a time where that is a thing. Where if you say, I'm concerned about XYZ as it relates to men and young boys, and the reaction or response is more so about what that says about your support of women or your support of the other sex. And it's a very interesting time that we're living, like we are here for it, and the work that you do is so important for this kind of swinging back into balance. The toxic masculinity piece, Krista and I have talked about this a lot, not necessarily on the podcast, but in private. Maybe a little bit on the podcast, but this like deep compassion, I don't know if that's the right word, or just kind of pain we feel for this like blanket statement that masculine is toxic. And I know that's not the exact definition, and we're talking about a specific type of masculinity, but I think people take it to that extreme where it's like the masculine is toxic. And I guess, it was specifically related to dating. There's a lot of women in our community who are dating and are single. And so I'm wondering how it's kind of caused men to ultimately not be themselves because of this fear of being toxically masculine, even though it's like so nebulous. It's like, what is that?
Right.
So I'm just curious what you see specifically around men approaching women in these like heterosexual situations.
Yeah. I did maybe I'll just talk about toxic masculinity very briefly.
Yes.
And then I'll talk about this poll that I ran, which was really fascinating. In the psychological space, in therapeutic space, psychological space, spiritual space, all of those modalities, whether it's spirituality, any form of spirituality, any form of psychology, any form of therapeutic modality, it's about acceptance. And it's about being able to build a relationship with the thing that we have an adverse relationship with. And in all of those modalities, what they are all saying unequivocally across the board is when you begin to target something and despise it within yourself, right? We can use anxiety as an example. The worst thing that we can do with our anxiety is say, I fucking hate you.
Yeah.
I hate you. I hate that you're here. I don't want you. Get away from me. Right? Oh, why do you always show up when I'm in this meeting or around this guy or blah, blah, blah. When we do that, we make that part of us the villain and we begin to fuel it. It then feeds off of that because there isn't an integration there. It doesn't have a seat at our inner kingdom, doesn't have a seat at the table of our life. And so it begins to manifest more. We take that approach culturally with things that we dislike. And when we look at men and masculinity specifically, and we begin to say, oh, this is problematic, or there's a potential issue here, what has started to happen and be culturally acceptable is the demonization of that, the demonization of certain masculine qualities and attributes that maybe could be useful in some cases, but in other cases is definitely harmful. And the demonization of that thing without the understanding of it begins to create more of it. So like when you look at the whole toxic masculinity thing, I would really argue that that has done less help and more harm than anything else. Because what it's done is send a signal out to male culture and to men that says there's something wrong with you and we don't like it and you need to change it. And it's connected to these pillars of what you think it means to be a man and to be masculine, and these parts of you that you actually like and that most women are telling you that we want, right? We want direct, we want assertive men, we want men to sometimes, take the lead in the relationship and plan and these types of things, right? And that's not everybody, and I realize that, and it's a general statement. So what that does within male culture is that resistance and that hatred builds more of it. And so you see characters like Andrew Tate come onto the scene and glom on and do this very simple thing, which is he'll say a truth and an inflammatory statement. And the inflammatory statement is almost always related to some kind of hatred or rejection that men have felt and experienced. And then guys glom onto that, right? And then they move in that direction. So I'm not advocating for, just accept male behavior and accept all these things that are harmful. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the approach that we've taken culturally is creating more of a divide than anything else. Yep. 100% more of a divide. And we know that because we wouldn't behave like that with women. And if men were saying, oh, that's toxic, and, this part of femininity is so toxic and so unhealthy, no one would stand for that, right? And it's just
True.
it's just not how we would go about it.
So true.
So I think we need to change the conversation specifically around masculinity and men and this whole toxic masculinity conversation, because men want a function and a place. And one of the most damaging things that you can do to a man is say you're not needed and you're not necessary. And that will just create more men who are checked out from relationships, from dating, from society, from work. And historically the most dangerous thing cultures have ever done is exclude men and push them and drive them out to the fringes. And then you have large groups of men who are not invested in the culture, they're not invested in society, they're not invested in procreation or mating or dating or any of those things, and those men become dangerous. Yeah. And we're doing that in our culture.
So true. Wow.
Right?
That is so true.
That's the first part. The second part I've lost track of.
The poll.
The poll.
I got you.
Thank you. So I listened to this podcast with this woman named Ayala. I think I'm saying it right. It's Aella. And she was on this guy, Lex Friedman, who I
love
like.
Lex.
Yeah, he's great, right? And so she's had a very interesting past. She was a sex worker. She's a data analyst. And she ran these polls to see how do I want to describe this? To see how many women wanted a more sexually dominant man and how many men wanted to be sexually dominant. And in her polling, what she found was that more women want their male sexual partner, we're talking about heterosexual relationships, more women want their man to be sexually dominant than men want to be sexually dominant in the bedroom. So there's this emerging discrepancy that's starting to happen in dating because a lot of guys, because of the social commentary that's happened, we've sort of thrown the baby out with the bathwater, right? We've said, like, men, you shouldn't be direct, you shouldn't be assertive, you shouldn't be any of these things. And so men are scared to approach. Men are scared to talk to women. They don't necessarily want to. They don't think it's worth it. They're worried about allegations. They're worried about all sorts of things, right? They really, like, men are not engaging with women in the way that they normally would.
Yes.
And so I ran this poll on my Instagram profile, which is like 50-50, right? 50% men and 50% women. Same results. Women said unequivocally, I had 2,500 people go through the polling, roughly 2,500 men and women. And women, on average, wanted men to be sexually dominant more than men wanted to be sexually dominant within the relationship. And so there's this emerging discrepancy that's starting to show up in dating where guys are hanging back.
Wow.
And what's happening, and you can see this in dating apps, which is super fascinating. Dating apps are a shit show.
Shit show.
I'm
man.
like, so, I'm so glad I'm like married and in a relationship. I'm like, man,
Bless.
because I think I'd probably be, I don't know what that would be like right now, but that's a different conversation. Actually, my wife and I have talked about that a few times. So what's emerging on these dating apps is that women are having to make very quick decisions, very sort of snap decisions based on a couple images and some text.
Yes.
Right? And so when you take 50 men and 50 women on across these dating apps, what you have is that 45 of those 50 women go after 5 of the men. So on average, women are going after 5 to 8% of the men online. And the guys that are in the bottom 50% on Tinder, on Hinge, on Bumble, nothing.
Nothing.
Like, I mean, nothing. They can't get a message. They can't get a response. They can't get a match. They can't get anything. And so they start to check out.
Yeah.
And then they start to check into these conversations on YouTube and Reddit and whatnot that are saying, like the black pill and the red pill and all these different colored pills that are saying, women only want men over 6 feet tall and that make, over $150,000. And so they start to get jaded because they're on these dating apps and they just can't get any connection whatsoever. And then they go online and they see the data that's emerging from these dating apps that's saying that women are only selecting this sort of top 5% of men, and they're all clamoring after the sort of top 5%. And what's happening for those guys is those guys are realizing it. And so those guys are sleeping with a tremendous amount of women. They're not in relationships with any of them, or if they are, they're in open relationships with many women. And this is, I think, in part creating the discrepancy that we're starting to see between, especially within the age range of 18 to 29, where you have 66% of those men single, but only 33% of women in that same age bracket are single. So half as many women in that age bracket are single. Why is that? Well, one, women in that age range are dating older men, typically. Why?
Yeah.
Because older men generally are more mature, they've developed more, they've had time to gain some sense of economic status and stability, maybe social status, they've got a good network by that point, they've calmed through some phase of their life, right? Maybe they've hit rock bottom and started to, get their life together or whatever it is. But the other piece is that a lot of women are either saying that they're in a relationship or in a relationship with a man who is with many women. And that's becoming much more prominent within our culture. And look, I'm not saying that's good or bad or wrong or I'm not making a statement about whether it's morally okay or not. I'm just saying this is what the data is showing is happening with dating apps and some of the commentary that's happening within men and women in our culture.
Do you think there's a way to use dating apps that is healthy, or like what are your thoughts on, because I feel like it's completely changed the landscape
100%.
because I have a lot of incredible female friends who I'm 35, so they're 35, between 35 and probably 38, 39, we're single and beautiful, successful, yada yada yada. And their commentary about the dating apps is just that I think it's very specific to different cities. I'll say that.
That's fair.
A lot of them are in LA.
New York is like notoriously bad.
New York's bad. LA is pretty bad. It's a different guy though.
Yes, that's fair. I have met the men in New York versus the men in like Los Angeles and Austin.
Yes.
And they're very different.
Austin. So I was just in Austin. I was like, the men here are different.
Yeah, they're very different. They're very
Yeah.
different. I mean, I'm from northern Alberta in Canada, which is like, take a dude from Texas, but he spends, 6 months playing hockey in minus 20 or minus 30.
Love it.
Yeah. So that's where I'm
Personally.
from. And then 12 years on the West Coast in Vancouver. But they're very different. Anyway, you were going to say.
I'm just curious about your thoughts on dating apps, because I don't know if they're going anywhere. I think with our modern world and schedules and all the things, I'm just wondering if we'll ever go back to approaching someone in person.
So I think there's two parts to this that I'll say. It's a very interesting question because we're in a very interesting time where artificial intelligence is entering the chat room.
Yes.
And it's entering the equation in a really unknown way, and it's about to radically alter everything that we know in society, like everything. Nothing will be left untouched. So is there a way to have quote unquote conscious dating apps? Sure. Will people adopt them? I don't know. I mean, my wife and I have talked a little bit about trying to take a stab at creating something that would be meaningful, that takes certain principles into mind, certain therapeutic modalities into mind. I think the problem that we're going to start to see is AI is really going to screw things.
How do you see it screwing with apps in particular?
So like take Tinder as an example, right?
Uh-huh.
Tinder has 70% men and 30% women.
Okay.
So there are way more men on Tinder than there are women. And the female profiles that are on there, there's a whole bunch of them that are like kind of trying to hook guys into an OnlyFans account.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Tons. So there's a lot of female profiles that are on Tinder, for example, where, you know, it's trying to get a guy over to an OnlyFans subscription or model or something like that, or over to a, you know, some sort of like cam orientation or whatever it is, because that's a huge industry, right? Like in 2021, OnlyFans did $4.8 billion in 1 year in revenue, right? Where's that money coming from? Men, right? It's predominantly men that are spending the money on those platforms. And that's a bit of a different conversation. I'll come back to the dating app.
Mm-hmm.
So how is this going to affect dating apps? Well, if you have an AI chatbot that is programmed to pretend that it's a woman engaging with a man, now you don't need a human being involved to message that guy, to interact with him, nothing. And so AI is going to make it very, very easy for a man to be on a dating app and not know whether he's interacting with a woman or not. And these chatbots are going to be so good that he's going to feel like he's interacting with a human being on the other side of it, to the point that he'll sign up to an OnlyFans subscription, and that OnlyFans subscription will just be another chatbot. And the images that he's consuming are completely fabricated, right? Because, I mean, we've all seen the AI fabrication imagery. Some of the video eventually, like we're not very far away from the video being completely AI rendered. So these dating apps are on the verge of being infiltrated by AI chatbots that are essentially phishing schemes, right? They're essentially trying to get people into some form of pornographic content or subscription model or whatever it is. So I think that's one part of it. And I think the other part of it is there is an opportunity for us to use AI, I think, to understand human psychology and to understand specifically human attachment. Because at the base of every relationship is just our ability to attach to another human being. And so if you can take basic attachment and use something like artificial intelligence to create a platform that can get to know you and can get to know me and can understand how we attach, what our challenges are, you know, a little bit of what our shadow is, how we maybe sabotage that relationship, then you should theoretically be able to create an algorithm that can matchmake in a much more efficient way. That becomes a little problematic in terms of you're taking the natural human element of just like meeting somebody, you know, in the grocery store or at the, you know, yoga place or at the gym or wherever it is, you know, on the street, the coffee shop, where just the spark happens, right? The sort of natural human spark. I don't know what it is about this person, but I feel this connection, right? So it kind of takes that part out of the equation, and there's a lot of ifs around that. There's a lot of, precarious situations that could come out of AI in terms of how we're creating those matches. But I think that there is a possibility for it to go down that route. And I think that there's some companies working on that. Whether or not that'll actually pan out is a very, very different conversation. But all of the men that I work with, the first thing I tell them is to get off the dating apps. This is the first thing I say. Like, they're just not effective unless you want to practice digital communication.
Yes.
Flirting via text, right? Or making that first connection, So if you want to use it for that function and that purpose, go for it. If you're just fishing to maybe have some fun, go for it.
And for the numbers.
Yeah, and for the numbers, sure. But if you're really wanting genuine connection and you really want to understand how to develop robust social skills, which I'll just say, I think are going to become so important in the very near future. We are about to enter into a space, I think, where artificial intelligence
like a split
is going to split, and there's going to be like I heard somebody say, I don't remember who this was, but it's like it's not humans versus AI, it's humans versus humans who are using AI, right? So it's an appendage for us.
Sure.
But I think for many people, what's going to become more and more important are, can you be grounded and regulated in any space, because we're about to enter into the possibility of real extreme manipulation via artificial intelligence. So can you stay grounded and regulated when everyone around you is losing their goddamn mind?
Yep.
And do you have healthy, good social skills? Because those are going to become so important in a space where we've just had a whole generation just grow up online that they're overly reliant on their technological capacities, and they've under-indexed dramatically their social capacity. And with AI, it's going to free up a lot of time, a lot of skills. And so what's going to become very important is, do you know how to talk about to other human beings how you're using AI, right? How you're using this appendage. So yeah, I know that was a much broader answer to your question.
I'm glad you went there, and I never thought about, I know that it's impending, just that AI is going to be everywhere, but I never thought about the dating app aspect. I'm not obviously on them anymore, but I used to be, and yeah, that's a really, especially for men. I don't know.
We'd be having a different conversation if you're on dating apps right now.
Oh, 100%.
Be like, okay, tell me more.
Because I remember when I was on them, I actually was having, towards the end, like a nice experience. I was like kind of trusting. I wasn't necessarily going just for the hot, the tall, the whatever. I was opening my aperture to like kind of an intuitive feeling, and it didn't always come in the package that I thought. And I was actually having like a great experience, meeting great people, whatever. But thinking about men on the app in particular, because I don't know if the bot thing is happening to women as much with like the OnlyFans thing.
Yeah.
I would say no.
Probably not.
Because I would think that's like kind of a weird, it's a double standard, but like a predatory thing.
Can I say one thing on that though?
Yes, absolutely.
There are going to be men. What will start to happen to women? And,
catfished.
Is catfished emotionally.
Wow.
So there was I haven't seen South Park in a long time.
Wow, same.
It still exists, apparently. And
Good
a buddy
for
of
them.
mine sent me an episode that I actually took the time to watch recently, because one of the characters is in a relationship and he's having a hard time. I think it was Stan or whoever, I don't remember who it was, is having a hard time with his girlfriend. And one of the guys says to use ChatGPT, right, which is AI. And so he basically has ChatGPT respond to all of his girlfriend's text messages.
Wow.
And she falls madly in love with him again. And she's just like, I never thought that our relationship could be so good, and like all this stuff. And behind the scenes, he's like using ChatGPT, right? So what is going to start to happen is guys, being savvy, are going to start to use chatbots to engage with women on dating apps. And so women will be engaging with some form of a chatbot that's getting to know her, what she likes, what she doesn't like, what she's interested in, what she wants to do, all this kind of stuff. She'll be engaging with a chatbot, and then it'll essentially set up a date with that guy, and then he'll just have some of the information of like what she likes, what she enjoys, all that type of stuff. So that's a possibility as well. So I think it's really interesting to see what might come about. It could make dating a little easier. It could make dating a hell of a lot more worse. Like,
Yeah.
I don't honestly know. But I think the best thing we can do is use dating apps discerningly, and to reinvest in social capital, to go out with your friends, to get back, to talk to people in the grocery store and wherever you go and spend time, and to go to where you think the people that you want to date are, or where you think they are, and to engage with people in those spaces. Yeah.
Reinvest in social capital. I completely agree.
We all want that summer glow, and I know so many of us are going to the beach. We are showing a little bit more skin than usual. You might be traveling, you might be on vacation, you might be seeing someone who you want to impress. You might just want to feel really, really good in your body and feel like a beautiful, moisturized, slippery little goddess, and just like have silky smooth skin. And that's why I'm so pumped that Osea, my favorite skincare brand, someone that is so in integrity. They have all glass packaging, they're female founded, they're made in California, they're super mindful with the environment, and they have quality, clean products, has a really rare opportunity to get their bestsellers body care set at a reduced price. So this takes your body care routine truly to the next level. I feel like we've been doing 20-step skincare routines for years now, and it's time to actually take care of our bodies and take care of our body skin. Especially as I get older, I'm like, oh, it's more than just my face. That tells my aging, that tells my skin age, that tells how I take care of myself, and I really want to take care of my body skin in a different way. This amazing set includes their TikTok famous body oil, the body butter, and this anti-aging body balm and salt of the earth body scrub. So I start with the salt of the earth body scrub, which is really nice, especially because it has the salt component. So if you're an empath or someone that likes to clean your energy, you can use this body scrub to clean your energy too and get really soft skin. And then I put on the body balm all over my body because I feel like it just supports this really beautiful glow. If I'm going out for the night, I'll use the body oil, and I put the body butter on my feet and on any place that needs an extra bit of love. And it comes in this really beautiful vegan leather bag that you can take with you wherever you go. I now have 3 of these bags, and I'll put all of my travel accessories in it. It's truly incredible. Osea is a brand I use and love. I love their Sea Minerals Mist, their Sea Minerals Boost. I use their Ocean Cleansing Mud for my skin. Their Seabiotic Water Cream is really, really good. You cannot go wrong with any of their products. And what I really love about this brand is that it's really good for any age of life. If you're younger, in your teens, they're really supportive. If you're older, it's just really high quality products that make your skin glow and feel amazing. So I want you guys to get an amazing offer with this set. So the set has a value of $78, but you can get it for $52 at Osea Malibu, which is a 33% savings. And then you get 10% off additionally when you use our code. So that's 10% off the $52, already saving you like 43%, which is incredible. So don't miss out on this rare opportunity to get the Bestsellers Body Kit for 33% off and an additional 10% off your first order site-wide with code almost30pod at OseaMalibu.com. That's almost 30pod at OseaMalibu.com. That's Osea, O-S-E-A, and then Malibu.com, and use code almost30pod for 10% off.
2 last questions before we close, just on this dating theme. Speaking for a lot of women in our community and also some of my friends, women who are spending more time and energy building their career, and it's taking them, well into their 30s, and they're not necessarily prioritizing settling down yet. Neither good nor bad. It's just kind of what's happening. And, when they are dating or ready to settle down, a lot of them feel like there's a certain energy that they're putting out that is not necessarily metabolized well by men who are available to date, because there's a desperation, and one's on a ticking clock and one is not. I guess, what have you heard from men on that? I'm just curious.
You're really putting me in a
I
position
know,
here, aren't you?
but I mean, but I would love insight, because I can really understand both. And I know we're talking about a very specific kind of, coupling and scenario, but I'm like, I can understand, kind of the pressure and like feeling that. I never like feeling someone else's desperation. I'm like allergic to it, so I can understand.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah. I have an allergy to desperation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can speak for myself. I can speak for the men that I've worked with. I can't speak for all men in general, but I think for a lot of guys, we can feel that oftentimes of like, okay, you're done with maybe your party phase, you're done with setting up your career, you're done with like these boxes that you wanted to check off. And now there's this intensity of like, need to get married, need to have a kid.
Yeah.
And, I think for some guys that can feel like, okay, am I just another box to check off? Mm-hmm. And I think the marriage is becoming a very interesting conversation in our culture where people are waiting longer and longer. Mm-hmm. Less people are getting married than ever before. For men specifically, a lot of us know the data that 70 to 80%, depending on the state, 70 to 80% of divorces are initiated by women. So a lot of guys know that there's kind of like this, it's a double-edged sword. It might be something that a man wants, but there can be this hesitation of like, okay, so why now, right? Why
Sure.
me? How do I know that I'm not just going to be here for the 5 to 10 years that you want to have a kid and buy the house and do the thing, and then you'll be through that phase and want to do something else or go back to your single life. And so I think for a lot of guys, there's a big apprehension around marriage. And that can be intensified when a woman is really fierce with that part, right? Of like, okay, I'm ready.
Yes.
It's like, I'm ready, so we got to do this now.
Yes.
And it's a fine line. It's a fine balance to walk. I was reading, I think it was Pew Research had put out a study recently that they were looking at how women were having babies later and later and later, getting married later and later and later. And they found that by 2040, the projections show that 40% of women between 25 and 45 will be childless and single. So it's a big amount that's starting to manifest within our culture. Again, right, wrong, and different. It's not a moral comment. It's just what the data is starting to show. And so, I have a lot of empathy for both men and women in our culture who are trying to find their way into a relationship. I remember my wife, she's, built this amazing career, built this incredible practice. She's a marriage and family therapist, couples therapist. We met. She was just starting to come into like her peak of her career. Wow. And same with me. It's like my company was exploding. And I remember after we got engaged, she said, I wasn't sure if this would happen for me. And she said, I really wanted kids. I really wanted to get married, but I really wasn't sure if this would happen for me. And I thought, well, that's a little like that makes me sad, to know that there's many women out there that do want kids and that do want a family and that, do want to get married and want to do some of these things. And are struggling to find that balance, because I think for me as a man, like I always say that men and women experience time differently. I have this much longer horizon that I experience life in and what I mean by that is, women will come into I was going to say childbearing years, but
Yeah.
like childbearing years, and then they'll exit that at a certain time. They can't have kids any longer, or it becomes more and more challenging. And I think for men, we experience time much differently in the sense that there isn't as much of an urgency. And a lot of men don't feel the urgency to have a kid. And what a lot of guys are waiting for is, do I have the stability? Am I emotionally mature enough? Do I have the time? How is this going to alter my life? And so I think that needs to enter into part of the conversation that men and women are having when they're getting into a relationship and trying to decide whether or not they're going to have kids or want to have kids, especially if you're a woman who really does want kids. It's like, get curious about where that guy's at and start to ask him questions like, if you did want kids, where do you think you'd have to be in life in order to be ready for that?
Sure.
Is there a certain type of financial stability or emotional stability? Is there a certain place that you want to be living? Like, get a better picture, because he might have that stored away. And I think the last thing that I'll say is, and this is kind of a big one that I think our culture is really not talking about. In 1970, 11% of households had women as the primary breadwinner. And in 2020, it was 42%. So over a few short decades, we've radically changed the cultural landscape where men were predominantly, and breadwinner's a very antiquated word, but it's the word that the researchers use. But men were the primary earner within the household. And now a lot of women are out earning the men that they're dating. And it's creating this tension where a lot of men are like, okay, well, are you even going to want to have a kid with me if you out earn me?
Sure.
If you make 2 or 3 times much as me, like, what do I do then? Because I've been told and sold into this notion that I have to be the provider. And if it's not financial providing, then what am I doing? What's my role? And so I think there's this unspoken part of the social equation or the relational equation when it comes to having kids specifically, that because a lot of women, especially in metropolis cities, right, LA, Austin, New York, Miami, are out earning a lot of the men that they're dating, it becomes problematic, and people just aren't having this conversation about like, okay, well, how would we want to raise our kids, right? If you earn 2 or 3 times as much as me, am I okay with that? Are you okay with that? And if we're both okay with it, then how do we want to structure our life?
Right.
And I think that is causing a lot of duress for people who are just not having those conversations. So I think that's the last part of it.
And I mean, those are like the unsexy conversations.
Super unsexy, but
So-
necessary. Yeah.
But necessary.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people hesitate because they're like, well, we're just dating. We're not even engaged yet.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you sense that is the direction that you're going, though, and even if it is kind of early, I think we fear so much how the other person, what assumptions they'll make.
Yeah.
Or what they'll project onto those types of questions. And I think it comes with maturity. Like, I think in my 30s, I was like much more comfortable asking those types of questions than I was in my 20s. I was more so morphing to like be the one that they would choose, me personally. And I felt a little bit more in control in my early 30s. I wouldn't say all the way. But yeah, this is a really interesting conversation to be having. And a staggering stat around women who are wanting to have children, wanting to settle down, but not.
Yeah. We definitely traversed some territory that I wasn't expecting.
I know. I'm so glad. I love when guests say that. This has been amazing. I want to close the book. And we were talking about it briefly before we started, and just feeling so deeply the sense that this book is not one that will have just like a hot flash in the pan. I don't even know if that's the right phrase. Anyway, will be around for a long time, and hopefully the book that therapists and psychologists recommend to men entering this work. And I agree. I mean, I think, and I know it will be, what was it like putting pen to paper in this way, theoretically, where your work is now, a legacy piece and something that can reach so many people? And the additional thought to that question is just, we're writing a book now, and you kind of go through the work as you're writing it. Like you're kind of doing that initiatory walkthrough yourself. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a blast. It was very hard. It took a while. At first, a lot of publishing houses said that men don't buy books.
Oh, wow.
And so they were like, we love you. We love the platform. But guys don't buy self-help books. And I was like, maybe not publishing things that they care about, which was really fascinating to hear. And so as you get into yours, just like stay the course.
Wow.
But I really wanted to write something that was not just something that like the reader would read and be like, oh, there's some cool ideas in there. I wanted it to be training. I wanted it to be tactical. I wanted it to be something where the reader had to get into their own inner workings as they went through the book. And so every chapter has questions to uncover based on the chapter, and then some of the chapters have integration exercises. And it's based on shadow work. It's based on a lot of things that we sort of touched on throughout the show. And it's really about helping a man come into his own sense of internal leadership and to move through the blocks and the barriers and the obstacles, and for women to understand the men that they're with. I really wanted it to be a book for men, but to be a book about men that could help women really understand their fathers, their brothers, their boyfriends, their husbands, their sons. So it's been really interesting to see how men and women are using the book differently. It's called men's work, right? So it's like, I didn't expect so many women to engage with it, but it's been phenomenal to see how it's being received and how many women are like, oh, I get my ex-husband now, or I get my husband.
Leave it to women to just be like, they're like, we're the one that buys books and we're going to buy this one.
And, I think I get a lot of questions of like, how do I help my partner?
Sure.
And what I almost always say is buy him the book without the expectation that he has to read it.
Yeah.
Just give it to him and say, heard this guy on a podcast, thought you might enjoy it. No pressure.
Yeah.
And let it be his choice.
Sure.
And maybe, or just like read the introduction, read the first couple pages. If you don't like it, give it away.
Yeah.
And because he might not be ready for it. It might sit on a shelf for 6 months until he picks it up. So
that choice point is so important.
So damn important.
Ooh.
Yeah.
We really try. We really try to change them. We really try to make their life better. And it never works.
It never works. But it's from a good place. It's from
course.
love. I get it.
But they have to choose.
Yeah.
So powerful. Thank you. Thanks
for having me.
Awesome. We'll link everything in the show notes, courses, the retreats, the book, everything. So, and the podcast. The podcast is phenomenal, by the way.
Thank you.
Really phenomenal.
Thank you so much, Connor. What a beautiful conversation. Really appreciate you. Again, that is Connor from ManTalks, and the book is Men's Work.
And thank you to our sponsors for this episode, bringing you brands that we have vetted for you, we have used and approve of and love sharing with you. Thank you to Osea, Symbiotica, Neutriful, and BetterHelp. You can find all discount information in our show notes, both the codes and links, as well as on almost30.com. Thank you for listening to Almost 30, for subscribing, just being an incredible part of our community. If you're curious about just being more in the community and experiencing Krista and I more intimately and one another more intimately, you can check out our membership at almost30.com/membership.
We love you guys. We'll see you soon.
See ya.